Morning.
All right, we are about to get started. All right. So we're going to dive into a new topic starting today. What we're going to look into it is first a little bit of basic programming concepts, and then we'll get into HTML, XML before getting into more a service API and the service testing. Okay. So as a QA, you're not expected to know a lot of programming, right? But as you get into the automation world, you're going to run into some sort of scripting that will automatically get generated. And it's important to understand the concept around the programming. So we're going to do a little bit of concept around the programming, and then we'll look into the where it can be applicable on that. Okay. So let's start talking about the high level structure. Okay. So when you look at the programming or any program, right, the basic structure is more or less kind of same. Okay. What you're going to see it in any programming language is there will be some declarative statement which will indicate there is a start of the block or start of the program. Then you will have some sort of temporary memory type of variables, and then the actual code that executes it. So if you look at it in a visually what the program will look like, you will have something like this, which contains the block. So this will indicate the start of the block. Then there will be some sort of end of block. Then there will be some temporary variables. Which will hold the information while you're performing computations. Okay. And then they will talk about is the execution statement. Or the actual statement which will manipulate the data to get the outcome that you're looking for it. So let's take a look at it. And we'll show two different languages as we go through it, right? So the one at the top is known as a transact SQL, which is fairly common language that used in on the database when you're manipulating data or trying to pull up the information from the database. That's what you're going to look into it. Okay. So the first statement, which says create or replace procedure, hello world, that essentially indicates that this is a new start of the block, and it is kind of trying to create a procedure. Okay. And that the block is known as a hello world. So if you think about it as the name by which that block will be identified when you want to call it, you will call it through the hello world. Okay. Then it says, this is where my programming instructions will start, or the block will start, and indicates I'm done with the programming block. And anything in between is essentially becomes a block known as a hello world block or procedure. Okay. And all it's doing it is when you look into the execution, it is just trying to like print a hello world into whatever the output devices is going to be. Okay. That's the simplest. There's no variable, no manipulation, anything. It's just the start and in a simple execution statement. Okay. Now, if I have to do the same thing in what is known as a 4GL or fourth generation language, which is like Java or C#, here is how I would do it. right? They will have, again, the class or the block is known as a hello world. In a C# and a Java, essentially your start of the block and end of the block is indicated through curly braces. Okay. Within that, it says, I'm going to have a method, and I will talk about it like it's, if you get into the programming class, an object-oriented mindset, right? So think around, this is an object, and this is in the API on top of the object to go and manipulate that object. Okay. So it is doing the same thing, like it's, I have one execution statement called print line hello world. This is exactly performing same function as that. Okay. So this is simplest structure. Now, if you can also do is essentially put a variables. Variables are nothing at a temporary holding place that allows you to perform the calculation. So if you're using a calculator, right, you have an M+ button, right, which allows you to save one piece of calculation into the memory, and then you can recall it and reuse it at a later point. Same concept. You may have multiple variables that allows you to hold the memory, and then you can call it as needed during the manipulation or execution of statement. Okay. So same concept, right? Here is the name of the block, my example. Okay. Here is the start and end of the blocks, indicating that that is the execution group statement. The entire program is here, right? Because it starts with a create procedure when I call that block. There are two temporary storage. One is called age, which is holding a information like integer or type integer. And the second one is a middle initial, which it says that it's only one character long. So it will hold one character into that memory. Okay. The age will hold a number, and middle initial will hold a character. Okay. Then in execution, what you're doing is you're setting that variable that you put a temporary memory age as a 21 as a first statement, right? So this is where I'm assigning the value into the memory, temporary. I'm doing same thing with my middle initial, which is a one character, so I can put a one character in it. I'm putting it K. Then I'm executing a print statement, which is using that temporary variable to print that value. So I'm saying I am, and I'm saying insert that temporary variable, or in whatever it contains, print that information, years old. So in this case, I will print it, I am 21 years old. Okay, so that's what this statement will do. This is how you use the variables. Same thing for the middle initial. Okay. If I have to write the same thing in the 4GL language instead of a database language, same thing. That is an integer, and the variable is known as a string, or the holding container is known as a string in case of Java. You can also use char if you want it, or you can use string. So there are multiple things you can utilize it. Okay. And then performing the same functions, setting it and doing it. There will be, as you notice it, right, there will be a little bit of nuances are different, right? In case of SQL, it is like it's doing a set command to set the value. In a 4GL language, you're just using equal to character assignment to assign it into that variable. Okay, so there will be, depending on what programming language you're using it, there will be a little bit of minute differences, but the structure is going to remain the same. Okay, now, as you started seeing it, right, there will be some operators that you need to execute in order to either assign a value or evaluate the value of the value, right? So there are 3 sets of operators, or 4 sets of operators that you typically kind of use it. Okay, the first one is a Boolean, which will be just like a true or false. Okay, and those operators are essentially and or not operations. So AND operation is essentially tries to evaluate, is this condition and this condition both true? Then it'll give that. So if you've not used Boolean algebra, right, that's what this is about. It says, if one statement is true, I'm going to essentially say, is the other statement also true? And if both are true, then the answer is true. If one statement is false and second statement is true, the combination is going to be false, right? If I have a false and false, it's obviously it's going to be false, right? So that's an AND operator. And this is how you represent that in the mathematics, right? The upper caret. And here is the two language and ampersand for a. Okay, so when you see this kind of operator, you can see, hey, this is what they're trying to do. The second operator is OR, which is either this or that. As long as one of them is true, you're going to get the true. Both are false, you get the false. Okay. And then the way it's equal in a C#. And then the last operator is not, which is essentially says, if this is not true, right? So it's trying to like, it's get the negate value of whatever the condition comes up. Second set of operator you're going to see is a comparison operators. Right, this is where you get the equality greater than, less than, greater than equal to, less than equal to, or equal. This is shows you how you would normally represent it in a math. This is how you utilize it in the different languages, whether it's a SQL or C# or Visual Basic. Okay. Now notice this, right? So the equality is 2 equal sign, partly because the third type of operator we talked about, the assignment operator, is just a single equal, right? So this is how we distinguish it. Is it, am I checking for a condition or I'm assigning a value? Okay. But in a SQL, since you have a set as a command to assign it, equality is essentially just a single equal sign. Any questions on the structure so far before we get into what are the different ways the programming instructions are structured? Yes.
So, is it that we can either use the Java or use the physical?
So it depends on what programming tool you're using it to automate the test. Some of them support Python, some of them support Java, some of them support Visual Basic. So it's going to be depending on that. But more or less kind of structure of how you would read through those programs is more or less kind of same. Okay. And then when you look into programming execution, right, you're going to have 3 different types of statements. The first flow you're going to have is all sequential flow. That means I'm going to take the first instruction, followed by second instruction, followed by third instruction, and so on. So everything is going to be in sequence. The other optional is going to be is when I make a decision, right? For example, if you're like, it's kind of doing an R form, and then you would say it's whether you're trying to determine whether the applicant is eligible for the loan or not. And if so, what would be the interest rate, right? Based on their credit score. Right, so you can put some sort of if a decision type of condition saying that, hey, if the credit score is greater than 800, then give the interest rate as 5%. If it is less than 800 but greater than 700, give the interest rate as 6%, right? But you will see it only one of those conditions will get executed. Those are the conditional statement. When you do it if then else type of statement, if this is true, execute this set, else execute the second sets of instructions. So they are not sequential anymore. It's either this set or that set only. Okay. If you do that, that's called the decision statement. The third one is an iterative state controls. That means I want to repeat the same thing over and over again. Within that, I could do it 2 different ways, right? I can repeat it for set number of times, or I could repeat it till certain condition is true. right? So we'll see it in example for all of them. So in this case, right, you can see it like it's the department equal to 5 is the first statement or first execution, right? Then when I just do it, second statement is if, right? So I had a sequence from going from first statement to the second statement, but the second statement is conditional statement. So it's going to evaluate if the department is equal to 5, then print that the employee should be paid more than 25,000. Okay. But if that condition is not true, then it will skip the first statement and then execute the second statement. So in this scenario, right, since that first condition is true, what are you going to see it? The first statement is going to get execute department equal to 1. Then it's going to check for condition, and that condition is true. So it's going to execute the print statement, and then it's going to ignore the next two statements altogether and says, I'm going to end that statement. Right. Versus if you were looking at earlier here, right, when we were doing it, all of the 4 statements are sequential, right? All this 4 will get executed because they are sequential statements. Okay. Same thing, you're going to see it into C# or Java language, right? This is the conditional statement. Based on the condition that I'm going to execute this block or this block if the condition is false. That's how you see it, a conditional statement execution. Any question on conditional before I get into iterative? It's very simple. If this is true, do this, else do that. Now, as I mentioned, when you're trying to do a repetitive statement, right, there are 2 different ways you can do it. One is a fixed set number of time, or based on certain condition, you keep doing that till that condition becomes true. If you want to do a fixed set of time, you will do it something known as a for loop. It says, keep doing this for, well, the value is X to the value is Y. Okay. And the second one is while too. So let's look at the for loop. So what you're seeing is on the left-hand side is the for loop. What it does, it says that when the value of I is 1, till the value of I is less than or 10, every iteration you increment value of I by 1, and then execute this statement. So it'll do it. The first time the value will be of I is 1. It checks it. Is I less than or equal to 10? Yes. It's going to execute this statement, which is print hello world. And once it finished that loop, it says, I'm going to increment the value of I by 1, right? So this is the start. This is the end. And this is increment by every time. Okay. So it shows you how many times it increments or how often it increments at the end of the loop and what by how much value. So this will go when value of I is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Right? Even at 10, the condition is
Yeah. Yep. Come on.
warm up.
Take some time.
Yeah, it's gonna want. But in that for loop, right, when that condition finishes, you predetermine already know, right? Because you know the value of I initial is 1. You're gonna keep it executing till I is less than equal to 10. And you know in every increment there's going to be increment by 1. So when you look at the code, you can clearly see it how many times that code is going to get executed, right? That's predetermined number of times. Okay. So that's one way you can do it. If you don't know how many times needs to execute it, then you do something called a while loop. And what you do it is you identify the starting value, but then you put a condition to say it's, as long as that condition is not true, you get out of it. If the condition is true, you continue to repeat that. Right? That's where your Boolean and the equality operator comes in. Right? That's where it's checking, is this condition true? Yes or no? Right? As long as this gives me a Boolean answer, which is either yes or no, I can say, okay, if it is yes, continue doing it. If it is no, break it out and stop doing this repeatedly. So, and here is the example. If I have to do exact same work, what I've done in for loop into the while loop, this is how I would do it. Okay, I start with I is 1, and then it says, let's just check condition. When I is 1, is it less than or equal to 10? Answer is yes. So I'm going to go ahead and execute the next set of instructions. Then I'm incrementing I by 1. And so now the value of I2, let me get it out, and then it's going to check it again. The condition is 2 less than 10. Yes, then keep doing it. Okay. A more appropriate example for you guys to think around it is, remember we have a loan calculator, right? And what does it require? A user to enter a valid positive integer, right? So you can read it that whatever they entered it, and you can check it. Is it a positive integer? If the answer comes out to be yes, then you get it out of it. If it is not positive integer, you prompt it back again, right? So you can do something like it's while you can say not positive number, right? You keep asking it. So as soon as that condition becomes false, and when it is truly positive, this condition will become false, right? Because it's a none. It'll get out of the loop. So this is the way you can keep prompting the user. You don't know how many times they will enter a wrong number, right? There is no predetermined number. We'll prompt it that till they come out with the right value, then you can calculate it, what will be the monthly payment. Okay. Question of how indeterminate iterative loop can be used.
Just to make sure I understand what you're saying, is this similar to how we enter a password and
So password is a little bit different, right? Because most of the system don't allow you to enter the password indefinite number of times, even if you're wrong, right? They allow you to, let's say, 3 attempts or 5 attempts. And after 5 attempts, it says, okay, you need to go away for 15 minutes before you can reattempt it.
yeah, but that is for you.
That's a combination of for and while loop you have to do it,
Okay.
right? What you do it is you say, is it, take it password, you do it 3 loops, and says, as long as they enter it, but within, as long as they enter the valid value, you don't do the next iteration, you break it out and go. Right? So you can do it like it's, while my password is valid, then I won't execute it. While my password is invalid, I'll prompt it, but then they will increment the value, and then you will put the dual condition. Is password valid and number of attempts is less than 3. And if the answer is yes, then it'll prompt, otherwise it will not prompt. So you can still do a while loop, but you have to put multiple conditions into it. Okay, any questions on the basics of programming? As long as you know this, anybody can give you a code and you can figure it out what exactly the code is trying to do. I'm talking about automation codes for the testing. I'm not talking about the detailed programming stuff. But there's a lot more involved in detailed programming than just this basic concept. But as a QA, these are the minimal thing that you need to know. Okay. Any questions? All right, let's dive into the next topic. Okay, we'll talk about HTML. How many of you know about HTML? Okay. How many of you know about going into the internet and viewing the information in a browser? All of you know, right? So what browser is nothing, but it just essentially takes a HTML code and displays it. Okay. What it stands for is hypertext markup language. Okay. So all of the web application that you see here are essentially nothing but presented a hypertext markup language in a visual way that you can see it. Now, how that information gets generated, that's a different thing. So let's talk through it. Okay. Okay. So let's say you're trying to browse to a website. How does entire thing works behind the scene? Okay, let's say you're sitting here on your browser. Okay, and in the browser, right, you have a URL tab, right? So where you just type it, whatever the address is, like whether it's an rflown application address, or let's say if you're going to CNN, you'll type it cnn.com, right? So how does that information gets into that? Okay, so what happens is when you do type it into cnn.com and click on that go button, it goes out from your internet provider to somewhere in the cloud, internet, right? With every internet, they call something as a domain routers. So they intercept whenever you type cnn.com. Okay. And they have something known as a lookup tables. And there are multiple nodes across the world. They look into cnn.com and says, is that an address associated with cnn.com? Okay. And so there are a couple of addresses that you need to think of, right? One is known as IP address. Right. Depending on what version you're using, there is an IP4 or IP6, right? Think about it, it's a group of 2-digit numbers, okay, which can have a value up, or actually, it's a numbers which can have a value between 0 and 255. Okay, so it is like it's an IP4, you will have 4 such number. Okay, and each number is between 0 and 255. Okay, and then there is something known as a MAC address. Okay, so think around it like it's in US, right? All of us has a social security number, which is unique, right? MAC address is a unique number for every device that connects to internet. Okay, so when I look at Bhagyashree, your laptop versus I look at Jivan's laptop, or when I look at Marin's laptop, all of them have a different MAC address and unique MAC address. Okay, so which is known as machine address code. That's what the MAC stands for. Okay, you're going to see it. MAC address is something like a 2-digit number, right? So it'll have AB:CD:XY:1 to something like that. Okay, so every machine on the internet is identified by either IP address or a MAC address. Okay. Typically, like it's when you're on the internet, the first thing they look at is IP address. And as long as you're able to identify the IP address, it'll just start routing that. Okay. So when I look into CNN.com, right, in the routing table, that will have an entry like CNN.com maps to this IP address XYZ. So internet then takes that request, gets it, oh, I need to send that request to the machine XYZ. Okay. It goes and tries to find it. Where is the machine XYZ? So there will be some mapping, routing, where there will be a machine XYZ. Okay. So that machine is going to say, I'm going to deliver to that. The request that I just generated from this browser to that. Now, within that machine, okay, they have to have something known as a web server, which is going to then take a request coming from web or intranet and going to process all those requests. Okay. So what you're going to see is within that machine, you can have one or more web servers. Okay. So you have, right, one machine, one or more web servers. So when I deliver that to that machine, it will also say, hey, this application or this request needs to go to CNN.com. So on that machine, there will be a unique web server, which is kind of saying, I'm going to process all the requests that comes as a CNN.com. Okay, so that request gets delivered to that particular web server. Okay. Now within the web server, you will have multiple web applications. Okay. So I may have multiple web applications. Okay. So for every web server, I can have one or more web applications. Okay. So along with CNN.com, they will say, okay, there's only one application called CNN, and I'm going to deliver to that. Okay. Each of the web application is then broken down into multiple pages. Okay. So they will have multiple pages. So if you ever go to Amazon.com, right, there will be a home page. From there, you can go into the Prime Video or books or any other things that you want to do, right? Your account information, right? Everything is a unique page. Okay, so web application is going to have one or more pages. Okay, out of all those pages, only one is designated as a home page, which is kind of the, right? So only one home page. Okay, now let's see how all of those things fits into my request of CNN.com. Okay, so it converts it into IP address, the request. Okay, that say it's an XYZ, so it looks for machine XYZ, and it says to that machine, here's the URL to submit that request. So they're going to say, oh, it's a CNN.com. So I'm going to look for a CNN application into that. Okay, so it's going to go find it. This is the application CNN.com. Okay, and this is, since you didn't specify anything else in the URL, it's going to pick by default the home page. Okay, so it's going to contain whatever it is HTML is created for that home page. It's going to take that HTML and it's going to send back as a response to that machine. Okay, your browser then gets that HTML content and says, okay, now I need to look through that HTML content and present that into your browser screen. So then it looks through every content and then displays appropriately. Okay, so this is how the entire web application works. Now, if I would have said it cnn.com/sports, then it says, oh, you don't want a homepage, you want a sports page. So it'll look up as which one is sports page. And it says, okay, here's the sports page. Let me send you back the content of that. So instead of your homepage, you see it a different content. Right? Same concept when you log into rflown.com, right? The first time when you don't specify anything, it says, oh, I'm going to take you to the home page, which is my login page to the application. So it displays a login. But once I log in and click it, observe it, that URL changes at the top, which indicates, oh, I'm logged in as a dealer, show me the dealer homepage. So it'll give you the HTML content for the dealer homepage and present it to you. So you're no longer seeing a login screen, but you're seeing a dealer homepage screen. So that's how the web page and the web server and web applications work. Yes.
So in this case, let's say I'm a dealer. If I specify the function under function and specify the dealer page, can it then just the dealer page?
So typically, you have a security aspects involved in it, right? So first of all, validate it. Are you kind of logged in as a dealer? And are you authorized to view that dealer page? Then only it will give you. Just because you put a URL, by default, it will not just give you that URL, right? It will not circumvent the security. It looks into that and says, okay, you want to get that? It's going to check it. Are you logged in? And do you have the privilege to view that page? Then only it will give you. So that, but like it's, if you are like it's in a public site like cnn.com, which is more informational, or abc.com, right? Or fox.com, any of those kind of public information site type of thing, which doesn't require you to log in, then it will parse you and says, oh, you want this page versus that page, and it'll give you that page.
Thank you.
Okay. So why did we look through it, right? Part of the reason is about 90+% of the application today, if you're accessing it from a browser, it'll be a web application. Okay, the only other difference is when you're doing a mobile applications, right? Each application will be separate. But if you're like sitting on the computer and accessing everything, like whether you did the Azure DevOps, right, or rflown, you're going to see the behavior that like it's a lot of the applications are web applications, which doesn't require you to install a whole bunch of things on your machine. It is kind of just throwing it out there and allowing you to log in and work through. Okay, so most of testing that you will conduct will be centered around web applications. And that's why it's important for you to know how the HTML works. Because if things doesn't show up, then you're going to look into HTML and says, what is wrong here? So that I can help the developer to say, hey, this is wrong. Okay. So we talked about the web server, website, right? Website is nothing but a web application. We talked about the various web pages and the special web page called a home page. Okay. So now let's look at how actually the sites gets designed. Okay. So a lot of times when you're trying to like it's good and trying to build a website, they build it something known as an information architecture first. Okay. That information architecture tries to help you to understand what kind of information I want to present it. Is it purely informational, which doesn't require any security? Or is it a security? Or is it has an information which is not just presented, but I'm going to get some input like form, right? If I'm like, it's going to presenting a credit application, that's a form that I'm going to fill in and get that information. So it's important to understand it. What is the goal for your website? What kind of information you're trying to do it? Then you build a structure similar to what you saw it in rflown, right? You saw it in the design, detailed design. What is the page layout? That's nothing but an information architecture of how I'm going to flow the information from one segment of the application to the other segment. Right. So you come up with that general structure of page and topics, and then you build the application, or then you build the website. Okay. Now, all of the pages that you're going to see it are hypertext markup language. Okay. So what is the purpose of that markup language? It essentially, it's a markup for the browser that, hey, whenever I encounter that markup, I'm going to perform that particular action. Okay. But markups are nothing but a series of tags that a machine can understand. Okay. So let's look at it. What are the tags, right? So HTML tags are essentially any instruction that is surrounded by the angular brackets. Okay. And then they will have a start tag and an end tag. So think around switch on and off, right? As soon as the start tag is encountered, the browser turns on that switch to perform that particular action. And it'll keep doing that action till it encounters an end tag, which will turn off the switch. Okay. So think about tags as start doing it, stop doing it, and that is a matching of it. Okay. So for example, like it's this particular, if I have, let's start doing it, and the instruction is capital B, it says every text that follows this particular point onwards needs to be bolded. Right. So capital B indicates that, hey, text needs to be bolded. Till it encounters another tag which says that stop bolding it. Everything in between is going to be bolded. Okay. So start tags are usually just angular brackets. The end tag are same angular brackets, but it follows something known as forward slash. And that. So this is my start switch, and this is my stop switch. Okay. So computer will keep doing it, start, stop, and then you can make a series of those switches. The only rule is it has to be properly nested. So in other words, you can't say, hey, I'm going to start a switch. Okay. And then I'm going to end a switch. This is I for italicize, italicizing the letters. Okay. You cannot do something like this. Okay. It has to be in a sequence, and it has to follow the start and end sequence. Right. So this is not permitted. But if I do it something like this, this is permitted because it's a property nested, right? It says, I started the switch, I ended that switch in that order. And it is outside a bigger turn on and off switch. So any character you put in here will be bold and italicized. Any character you put in here will be bold. Anything you put in here will be bold. Okay. Now, majority of tags come into a pair like this.
What's the idea of the bold meaning is beginning like that?
Yeah, so whatever text you put into it, and we'll see it in a moment, it'll get bolded. It'll get displayed in your browser as a bolded text. Okay. If you don't bold it, it'll come as a normal text. Okay. Now, there is only certain exception to it. Right. There are a few tags which doesn't require start and end. It just only one tag. Right, which is essentially I want to create a new paragraph, or I want to create a new line. Right. So that there, or here's the list item. Okay, there's no end. You keep doing as many list items as you want it. Okay. So let's take well, before we do it, let's talk through it. Right. We talked about the embedding, right? The sequence. Here's a head title. You need to finish the title first and then do the head, right? Because that's the sequence. A lot of times it's known as first in, sorry. Okay, so not the first. Okay, there is a term that you want to do it. Last in, first out, LIFO. Okay, so whenever you're doing it in HTML, just remember whatever the tag you started last has to finish first. They need to be first out of the system. Okay, so in this case, I have a head and title. Put some text, put a head and title. Apply the last in, first out. Which one was last in? Title. Is it first out? No. So this is not a valid HTML tag combination. So it'll give you an error. Browser will still try to interpret, but you will get an error messages or inappropriate content. That's what you're going to see it. Okay. But if I do it head title and then title head, the last in, first out. Okay. A couple of other things to know it. The tags that you identify within the Angular brackets, they are not case sensitive. What that means, if I do a bold for this, or I can do it bold for lowercase, they are one and same. Okay, they're not case sensitive. Okay. Some tags can have an attribute. Okay, and the way you define the attribute is within your Angular brackets. And every attribute has a value associated with it. So if I'm doing a paragraph and I want the paragraph to be aligned center, I'll use the P tag. Along with that, I'll put an attribute called align. And the value of that attribute I'll define as a center. So what I'll do it is whatever the paragraph that follows, that particular tag will be centered. It won't be a left justified, it won't be right justified, it will be a center justified. Okay. What it does it is when you do it, the combination with the tags and attributes, now you can create a rich looking page, even though you're sending it all text message. You're telling them, oh, I'm going to send you this content, but I want you to organize and display the content in this way. And that's where you embed the text. Okay. So let's take an example. Okay. So what you're seeing in the green is an HTML page. Okay. What it does it, let's apply the last in, first out principle. It started with HTML. That was the first thing. So that should be the last thing that you finish it. Okay. Within that, there are two segments on an HTML page. One is called a head, and the other one is a body. Okay, and we'll look through an example what each one means, right? But if I specify head, which is the second in out, right? Then I have third one is title. So remember the order is HTML, head, and title. What order you need to pop up? Title, head, right? So it finishes title first, then finishes head. Okay. Then I can create the second layer, start with the body. So now I have HTML and a body because I already turned off the switch for title and head, right? So I'm turning on switch for the body. So whatever content I put it is going to be displayed as a body. And then I turn off the body. Then I can turn off the HTML tag, right? Because there's no more line. So let's put this content. Okay, so I'm going to take this content. Okay, I'll copy it. And I'm going to try to create a new HTML page. Okay. And the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to call I'm gonna create a notepad. Okay. And then that, I'm gonna just paste it. Okay, now this is important. When you save an HTML file, you need to make it sure use a tag or ending called .htm or HTML. Okay, and change the text to all file types. So I'm indicating it's not a text file. It's going to be whatever I specify as long as it's one of the valid file types. And HTML is one of the valid file types. Okay, so I'm going to do it is I'm going to go into October 23rd, which is the current folder I'm using it, and I'm going to call it is my first HTML page. So that's the name of the page that I'm giving, and you can say .html. Okay, so now it's going to take it. It's not going to create a text file. It's going to create an HTML file, and I'm going to save it. Okay, so now it's saved it. So if I go into my browser and look into my first HTML, look at that. I've said all HTML needs to be open in the browser. So that is by default, it already assigned or the HTML as the browser application page. Okay. Now, if I want to see it, how it'll look like, right? Because this is what it was, I typed it. Okay, let's look at it, what it'll look like. So if I double click on it, it's going to do that. Okay. And this is what it's going to display. Okay. It says hello to my first HTML page. Now let's look at it. What did I display? Okay. So I had it within the body. I had this message, and that is what it's displayed. Okay. I had within the head, I had hello. Notice that the name of the tab is a hello. Right. So what HTML does it, anything you define in a head segment, it essentially doesn't display in the main body of the browser. It uses that information to understand what is the metadata or tag is going to be on the browser tab. Right. I can put a whole bunch of computation in that. Okay. So let's look at it, right? So we say that, hey, I can do it a bold, right? And let's for simplicity, I'm going to do my bolding at 2 different places. So what it should do it for this rule is my hello to my first HTML should be bolded, and page in Yahoo should be still normal, right? So I'm going to save my file. Okay. And then you can just refresh it on this one and watch what happens. Okay. The first content, which was within the bold light or start tag and end tag, got bolded. And then the other one is still there. Okay. Let's say if I want to change my title from hello to HTML. Okay. If I do this, watch the title change from hello to HTML. Okay. All right. So let's practice it. I want you guys to write an HTML page yourself, right? So either you can utilize the same one that was in your PowerPoint, right? Or build your own page. Put some creative name and put that, right? So I'm going to give you 5 minutes, and I'm going to do one more thing, right? So here is the process, right? So in case if you want to see it while we go through it. Okay, here is the sets of instructions. You pull a text editor, whatever you're trying to save it, your HTML file, just save it as .html. Okay, then open a browser, like Chrome, Edge, whatever your preference, or if you're using MacBook, you can do it in Safari, whatever is your preference. And then open that file, make sure it shows up as HTML page. Do a little bit of messing with it, like it's whether the bolding or italicized, and see it how it changes. Okay, so I'm gonna give you guys about 10 minutes to create HTML page, make whatever changes you're trying to do it, show it to me and Harshal before we jump into the next part. Okay? Should be fairly simple. Yes.
I used to write it without having to put the title.
If you don't put a title, you can still write it, but then your tab will not show up with any title. It'll be just empty. Right. So when you're like, it's having a multiple tabs, like what Sneha had, if I have 5 tabs open, which one I need to do it, right? So that's where it goes in. Okay. All right. Let's continue. Okay. All right. I think, Joyce, you can catch it up later. Let's just continue it. Okay, so there's going to be a video recording, so it'll be easier for you to catch up. Okay. All right. So this is how you made the changes, save it, right? So this is instruction. Now let's look at it. So when you created the HTML page, right? You started with the HTML tag, ended with HTML tag. And there were 2 distinct tags, one called head and one was called body. Okay, so if you visualize it, the HTML page is essentially, this is what the structure is going to look like. It is going to have 2 sections. One is called head, other one is going to call body. Okay, head contains all of the information or metadata about the document. Okay, and the body contains actual text that will be displayed in the browser. Okay, when I say metadata, what does that mean? Things like title, right? Things you may still put some sort of calculation that you want it to be called it, that not be visible within the page. It shows up in there, right? So typically you're going to see it as title and some additional tags, and we'll see it as we start looking at the applications. What are the different tags can have? Then you're going to have within the body. It's essentially, that is what the page gets represented. So you can have things like text formatting, right? Bold, italic, underlined. You change the font type from, let's say, a one font type to other. You can do a Times New Roman or Helvetica or any other type of font that you wanted. Okay, you're going to have a line breaking and so on. But in addition to that, what you are also going to do is it's not always the information to display, right? So think around when you ask or prompt the user to enter their user ID and a password, right? So it was not just display, you wanted user to have an ability to enter something and take an action on whatever they entered, right? So those tags are called data control tags, okay? So what you can say is, hey, I'm going to do an input type of some sort of a text or a checkbox, right? Or I could have a drop down. Remember, we talked about the state. I could do a drop down, give me a list of 50 states so they can't enter anything wrong, right? Or the drop down was dynamically generated with all of the dealers which are present in the system so that I can pick it up as a dealer type, what dealer I'm working at. Okay. You can also have all of those controls are known as objects. So when we do it, more API programming and automation programming, you will see how those objects come into play to automate things. Okay. You can also, so here is an example. Let me see if I have that one right. Okay. So here's an example for that, right? So I want to input type called text, right? Then I have a drop down for selecting different values. And then I have a checkbox and a submit, right? So this is how it looks like it when you look at it, right? So I have whatever I can enter it, input type, right? It's free form text, or I can do it a drop down. So if you look into the code, right, it had two drop down values. One was Columbus and the other one is Dayton, right? So these are the values, Columbus and Dayton. So when I select a drop down, that's what it shows it. Okay, then I have a checkbox. Right, I have a link that I can go to. Right, because a lot of times you see it, there is a hypertext within the page, but you can click it and go to somewhere else. Right, that's what this is. You can put in images. Now, couple of things, right? As you look through it as a programmer, right? When you look at HTML, well, here's where you can start looking into it. So if you look at this, right, I'm calling it option as Columbus. And whenever you select it, I'm setting the value as Columbus. But look at what they did it for Dayton. Even if I select a Dayton, I'm setting the value as Columbus. And this is a fairly common mistake that developers do it. They're creating multiple options, so they just copy and paste it because they don't want to type everything else. And they forget to change certain things. And when you're testing it, it says, hey, look, I selected that value, but it always picks up this value. You can quickly look into HTML and says, that's where your problem, right? And here is the other way you can do it. So if you look into any browser, okay, when you're testing an application and you said something is goofy, you can right click on it and click on a view page source, and it'll tell you what exactly the page source looks like, right? You can look into it and says, oh, look at that. So even if you don't have access to HTML code and the page is looking weird, you can open that page, right click view source, and it will tell you what exactly it's doing. What is the HTML content it is sending? And you can help them to pinpoint, and you can say, hey, am I doing something wrong? Or the problem is with the code itself. Okay.
And when you do the view page source, you can't edit it, it's just for view.
It's just a view. It shows you what is the browser got it that it is interpreting and displaying it to. Okay.
So if there's anything wrong, what do? You just have to write it as.
That's bug tag, right? Okay. Again, there are additional things that's going to come in of how you put the image, right? An image is always going to come with an additional attribute, right? Similar to paragraph was aligning it to center, middle. That images you can say it's how big you want to display it, how wide you want to display it. And sometimes you may have to say it's, look, if your connection is slow and image is really big image, while you're loading it, what text you want to display. So you can put it like, here is alternate text that it's displayed while the image is still getting loaded. Okay. Obviously, you can put the HTML link. Okay. The question is, why you want to do it? Okay. So it's not only when you're testing an HTML website or a web application that you will need to do it, but when you are automating it. At that time, you need to understand what are the HTML tags, what are the objects and controls so that you can utilize that to automate it. So when we look through Catalan and some of the automation tools, first of all, we'll walk you through it. Let's just look at the example and see how we can get that information from HTML and tag it that for this field, do this, or this field, do this automation. Okay. Any questions on HTML? Here's the important resource that you need to know. That's my brother. Okay. I would like to go to a website called w3schools.com. Okay. Write it down, w3schools.com. This is a very good site. There's a lot of HTML. There's no programming, right? It's an easier understanding the hypertext and all. They have tons of things. You can say, hey, I want to learn HTML. Click on that. It'll give you an entire tutorial of how, what tags, what are the parameters, what are the basics. I strongly recommend spend some time going through this. And not only that, you can try it yourself. Here is the code, right? So they say, hey, I want to try myself. It shows that this is the code. I run it, it shows it, right? I can change it. Right? It will show me that this is the heading. Okay, and let's say if I want to change it into italicized. Okay, I can run it. Why it's not coming?
You have to save it.
No, you should not have to. You
That
guys-
is running with,
No, something is wrong. It's not running.
they save over there on the left side, do you try?
No, you have to create an account, looks like. They changed it. You could do it without creating an account.
Maybe that side has some issues that right now.
There you go. You see it? Change. So you can do that, you can run it, you can see it all of those things. So you can test out all those different things as you go through it, learning the HTML. Right? And look through it. There are forms, right? So which we talk about the data control. So if I want to create HTML form, you can, it just shows you this is how we create it, right? It gives you data control, right? Input type text. Remember what we talked about? Right, so it's showing you first name here is what getting displayed. It is calling that label is F name. So if I want to automate and I want to change that, I can access it F name, right? And it says whatever the value it comes in, right? So when I submit it, it shows you this is the data that it submitted. Okay, so as a homework for HTML, what I would like to create a form. So create an HTML page which displays a form that allows a user to enter their address. Okay, with a street name, city, zip code, and a state. Remember, it's different forms, right? So just like what this one is showing, right? So this one is showing a form of just like it's putting the first name and last name. I want you to build a HTML page that allows user to enter the address. Okay, as a homework, and use the skills or tutorial from here to build it out there. Okay. And again, that's not due tomorrow, it's due on Thursday. So you have time to read through it, figure it out, and then do that. But that will be a good exercise for you to learn it. Different things you can do it in HTML.
So we need to use this website, right? For the practice?
Yeah. You can use this website for practice, or you figure it out here, create your own HTML page, and then keep it local and display it. And send that HTML page to me and Herschel once you're done, so we can look at it. Okay? Any questions on HTML before I move to the next topic?
Does this send it to you or we will buy it on Thursday?
So if you're done, you can send it to us, or you can show it, right? It's one of the other one, it's fine. But I would recommend just send it, right? So that we can focus on the additional discussion. Because if your HTML working, that means you learned it. Right? And you don't need me or Herschel to show is it working or not, right? You can just quickly check in the browser, see if it's working or not. Okay. So look it through it, right? There are a whole bunch of the other tags. The beauty of this thing is you can look it up, all the HTML. Nobody is expecting you to remember all the tags. Right? There's not going to be an exam that Herschel are going to conduct that says you remember all the tags. Right? It's as you go through it, you need to get more and more comfortable to it. So more advanced application will be using advanced HTMLs. We'll be using more different tags. Right? So that's one set of language that you need to learn it and get comfortable with it. The other one is called an XML. Okay. So think of it. What did you use HTML as? Hypertext markup language. The whole purpose was to present the information. Okay. XML stands for extensible markup language. So in HTML, right, you couldn't define your own text. You have to use it. Like it's you were trying to do it and says, why my screen doesn't display, right? Sneha was trying to like put something in the tag and says, my page doesn't display because you were not allowed to create your own tag. There are standard tags that is defined by an industry body, and that's all everybody uses. That's called HTML. XML, as I mentioned, it's an extensible markup language. Okay. Now let's talk through it. Okay. What it is used for. So HTML was more presentation. XML is used more as a document containing structured information. Okay. So let's go back to our Amazon example. Right. That originally we talked about it. I want to purchase something on Amazon. I'm going to put into the cart and I'm going to start my checkout process. When I do checkout process, right, I'm going to enter my payment information. Let's say I'm entering credit card information. Right. So that information then needs to send to my payment gateway. So can I send whatever format I wanted? And will the payment gateway will understand? Probably not, right? I have to structure it and say, what is my credit card number? What is my billing address associated with that card number? What is the amount I'm requesting it to be charged? Right? And if there is a 3-digit security code or 4-digit security code that I need to put it along with the payment or verification code that I need to put it, it also tells it when is my credit card is expiring. I need to put that information, right? If you try to check it anything out, it asks you all of that information. But I can't just send it, here is my credit card, here is my expiry date and that, right? It has to have some structure around it. So that when I send it to payment gateway, they know it. Hey, the first line you send it is the card number. The second line you send it is the person's number. Third line you send it is the amount that I want to charge it, right? It has to have some structure so both sides understand that this is the information I'm asking and this is the information I'm sending. And when they send a response, right, they're going to say, oh, you are authorized, or no, you're not authorized. Your credit card is rejected, right? They're going to send that information and I need to know whether they approved it or they rejected it. And if they rejected it, what is the reason they're giving me for rejection, right? So there has to be some structured way that I send the information and I get that information. And that's what's typically done through XML. Okay. So the difference between HTML and XML is XML has own text versus HTML has fixed text. I can define my own in XML, I can define my own. Okay. Another more important thing. HTML is always used for presentation. XML can be used for multiple things. One, I can send the document information, so it doesn't have to be a presentation. It's more focused on what is the content or information that I'm sending or I'm storing. Okay. Another important thing, XML, you can take that content, run through some sort of converters and put in whatever format you want it. HTML, there is only one presentation format. There's no more different things. Okay. Now, the key difference between HTML and XML is they both start with the tag. So let's talk about what are the same. They both have start tag and end tag, right? And the tag information is defined within the angular brackets. And the in between the tag is where you perform that particular activity. Okay. So for example, let's say I'm like it's trying to store an information about a movie. Okay. And all movie have directors, right? So I'll create my own tag called director. Okay, I have start tag, end tag start with a slash with the same thing as what was in the start tag. Okay, and in between those two tags is the value. In this case, Matthew Dunn is a director. So I have a tag called director, followed by the name Matthew Dunn, followed by end tag called end director. Okay, right? Same thing, forward slash, same exact value. Okay. Start tag, end tag. Okay. You can have another element the same value. Could have the same actor within the movie. Okay. Remember other aspects I saw mentioned it in HTML, all the tags are case insensitive, right? So capital B or lowercase b both represents a bolding tag.
Okay.
It's a different in XML. XML is case sensitive. What does that mean? That means if I have a tag defined like this, there are three different tags.
Right.
Even though it's the same word, the case sensitive is different. This is all caps, this is just the first letter caps, and this is lowercase. So if I do a tag with called city, and end tag with slash lowercase city, it's going to give me an error. It's going to tell me those two are different tags. They are not the same tag, which was not the case in HTML. I could do an uppercase title and a lowercase title and still going to say it's a one and same tag. Okay. So XML tags are case sensitive. Okay. Another thing in HTML, you always needed a start tag and end tag. In XML, you can abbreviate tag. If you know that it doesn't have any data value, you can actually take this thing, which is no data value, and put it into a single by calling like this, married and slash. So it indicates it is the tag without a value. Okay. Forget this for a moment. The one at the top, right? How do you interpret it? There is a start tag. There is an end tag for married.
Yeah.
And since there is nothing in between, it's an empty value,
Right.
right? In HTML, you cannot abbreviate it. In XML, you can say that if I don't have a value, I'm going to just send you as married slash. So it recognizes, oh, it's a married tag and doesn't have any value. Right. Okay. So you will see that in XML. You will not see it in HTML.
So HTML need value and then.
HTML can have also an empty value, but you cannot abbreviate the tags. You still need a start tag and end tag. In this case, if I don't have a value, I can replace start tag and end tag with this special way to represent that tag.
But I have
So how you will do for HTML, like the.
There is, for HTML, I'll keep it like this. Because remember,
Okay.
HTML is all predefined tag. I cannot define my own. Whatever it is, I have to use it from that list.
Yeah, I'm trying to find out if we are not putting any value in the tag, what's the purpose of creating a tag if it doesn't have the value?
So certain times, like it's when you put a structure, right, you have to send it like it's, I know that there is an optional value. Since it's an optional, I'm not going to provide that value, but I'm still want to send you the whole structure. It says, oh, you are not, for example, like when you do it address line 2, right? Most of the time it's an empty.
Okay,
But you're still sending it all of that, just in case if address line 2 is there, then the structure is there, you're getting it. And you look at it when I receive it, oh, there is nothing for address line 2, so I'll ignore it and I'll continue with the rest of the address information. Right? When you're looking into credit application form, right, there are a whole bunch of fields which are required. There are certain fields which are optional. If I don't specify that optional field, right, it's not going to stop me from processing that credit application. But when I'm sending from dealer to lender, here's your credit application. Right? I want to send all of the information and say, hey, this particular field has no data in it. So, because it's an optional. Okay. As you go use more and more, it'll become an obvious the value of that. But that's the key difference that you need to remember with HTML and XML. Okay. So again, you can have just like attribute value within the HTML, you can have that in XML also. So I can define my own tag and my own attributes with it. So in this example, right, I can say a city is associated within the one zip code only. And here is the value of the zip code. The only key thing that you need to remember that any value that you define it in XML for predefined tags as a attribute has to come in double quotes. So when you look at it, right, I have a zip and the value of it is in double quotes and whatever the value it is. Right, so whether it's a number, text, whatever it is, you always have to put it in double quotes. That's a syntax rule. Okay.
is this same with HTML? Or this is
No, this is specific to XML because you are defining your own attributes. In XML, in HTML, you have no option. You're not able to define your own attribute. Whatever is industry standard body has put it, you have to use those. Right. So in this case, the way I would read it is there is a city called Embryville, and a zip code for it is 94608. Right. So that's how the information is attached with it. Okay.
Sorry, I think I'm getting a little bit, I'm trying to make sure the two kind of, so in this same code you have there, we always start with, is this still lethal here? The last thing first?
Yes, the XML is always lethal.
Okay.
HTML is always lethal.
Okay.
Okay. But again, when you're putting in XML, don't confuse yourself with, hey, I'm going to compare everything in XML with HTML. Don't do that. All I'm just saying is that both are markup language. Here's the difference between the two markup language. That is what I'm trying to get you to. Okay. Because this is how you're going to structure the information and share the information. The other one is how you're presenting information. There are two different purposes. Okay. Any questions on the attributes? So there are few rules, right? Similar to what we talked about. So let me get that. Okay. So when you look at an XML document, right, just like HTML, it will start with a declarative statement that this is an XML document, right? So it'll have into angular bracket XML and it'll have a version of that. Then it will have something known as a root node. Okay. Essentially, it is what is the major information contained in that XML document. So here's an example of a root node, which is books. It says this sets of XML is going to contain a whole bunch of books. And it's called a books. Okay. In every XML file, you can have only one root node. Okay. That's one rule. Within that, you can have as many nodes as you wanted. So here I have books, which is a collection of things. And I'm showing only one book, but I could do it 5 books in there. Okay. And this one follows same LIFO, last in, first out rule, right? So book, inside that, there is a title, there is an author, right? So here are all the elements of a book. Book has a unique ISBN number, and it has a title and author. Sometimes it can contain multiple authors, right? So I could have multiple authors. But here's an example of what XML nodes will look like. Okay, if I want to like it's hold multiple books, here's an example. Right? For a moment, ignore the picture earlier, right? Focus on this side of the thing. Right? It has a ID. Every book has an ID. Right? Then it has an author. It has title. Some book may have year in which it is published. If I don't have that information, I'm just giving author and title. Alternatively, I could have simply just say that here, like this. Right? Remember the married tag, similar? I don't have any information for year, so I'm not going to provide it. So I could either completely eliminate it, or I can say there's an empty value for that particular thing. There's nothing associated in the value for that particular attribute or tag. Okay. So if you look at it visually, how it'll get represented, I have a collection of books. In that collection, there are 2 books. The first book has an ID 1, 2, 3. It has an author, which is Hull. It has a title called California, and it was published in 1995. That's one book. Then I have second book. If I have a third book, I'll represent like keep adding additional leaves to it.
Right.
Okay. So, oh, sometimes you can refer a book that, hey, this book was also like it's kind of related to that particular book. Ignore that. We'll just do that. When you do it, I want to keep it simple. So ignore this particular thing for now. Okay. It is like a scenario tree. It is the data tree, right? And sometimes you may have a referential element entry going from one entry to the other entry. That's all this is indicating, right? You will see it when you see in SQL example, in the database example, what referential integrities are. Okay. Let me look into it, right? So let me show you an example. Okay. So this is an XML document.
Okay.
Let me see if I can do control. Okay.
Do you have to write version 2? The XML version.
So there's a version 1.1, version 1.2. All it does is it tells you that this document conforms to the standard defined in version 1.0 of Excel. That's all it's doing.
Okay,
Right?
Can you skip that now?
But you need an XML iterative tag here,
okay,
which says that this document is an XML document and it conforms to version 1.0 standard of XML.
okay,
Okay. There is a version 1.1. You will see it when we do some of the web testing component, right? But it just states that everything that is in define, it's going to conform to everything that was built as part of the version 1.0 rules.
okay.
Right. It just says, can I have it instead of 1.0, 2.0? Right? You can, as long as there is a standard defined. Right? Well, again, don't get hung up onto things. What it does indicates version 1.0 is when I'm exchanging information with another system, they know how to interpret the XML document I'm sending. It says, apply the version 1.0 rule. There were some additional rules added into the subsequent version of 1.1. So you cannot have a version 1.0 application talking to application which is expecting 1.1 rules. You're going to have some data mismatch. So all it just says, before you go, here's a version 1.0. So a receiving application can look at it and says, oh, you're using 1.0, let me apply 1.0 rule. Oh, you're using 1.1, let me apply 1.1 rules. Right? So it gives it compatibility of allowing you to upgrade the systems without having an impact on each other. Okay. This one, here's the book 1 that we talked, right? Here's book 2. I can add the 3rd book. Right? Important thing is I can keep adding it, but I can't go ahead and add another book here. There's only one root node called books.
So when you are done, that's it. You can get done, then you end it with the root node.
Okay. Now, let's see it. How do you kind of make sure your XML is presented right way? Right. So I'm going to show you an example. Right. I can open the books into Edge. Yeah, I'm going to just open it using a browser. Okay. I'm going to open with a Google Chrome. So the difference here is you can, like, it's open the XML files in the browser. And then you can collapse it and see it, what it is looks like. Okay. So I can look at it. Hey, this XML contains all the books. It has inside it multiple things. And I can minimize each one and says, okay, I don't want to see it. I just want to see it, how many books it has. Oh, it has 3 books. Okay. Or I can expand it and do all of that. Now, remember in HTML, if I have goofed up something, it will still display a part of the page. XML, if I goof up, so I'm going to go ahead and look into this XML. Okay. And I'm going to change this books to, let's say I mismatched it and I goofed up in my tag. Okay. And I go into XML and I refresh it. Look at that. It gave me an error. It says, wait a minute, your XML is not properly formatted. There is a problem with your data. And the data exists on line number 12 at column 11. It gives you some sort of indication that, hey, I expected an end tag. You give something different. So I'll go to line 12 in my document, right? So if you look at the bottom, right, there are line numbers. So I'll go to line 12. I know there is some problem in this line. And then I quickly look at it and say, oh, it should be a starting tag. And if I'm expecting an empty, it should not, the slash should not be at the start, it should be at the end, right? So it looks at it, parses it, and gives you. So this is one of the ways you can see it if your XML file is properly formatted or not. Okay. Now, here are some of the guidelines, right? We talked about a root node, there's only one, right? All attribute value should be in double quotes, right? So if I put a zip code, even if it's a number, I still need to put it in double quotes because that's an attribute value. Last in, first out rule still applies it. Okay. And everything has to have an end tag. Whether you define explicit end tag or if it's an empty value, you put it with a slash. Okay. So Remember the site that I talked about, W3 Schools? Okay. It also has a. Where did it go? My XML. Okay. It had an XML. There it is. Okay. Just like you learn a little bit more about HTML, there is an XML tutorial, step by step of everything that you do. Okay. And this is like it's how you build a schema, how do you do it? Data dictionary using XML, how do you do the X queries? You do it, all of that. What I would recommend is use the basic one. Okay, just do it. Home, introduction, how you use and how you create tree and a syntax and elements.
Yeah, you stop right there, yep, XML.
Okay.
Stop, maybe
As soon as you finish the attributes, you stop there. That's the simple thing. All of the other is XML that a lot of developers use in programming in terms of doing it more automated, more validation. As I talked about, building a data dictionary. So building a rule that how a XML document should look like, what attributes are required and what are not required. All of that thing is there. But for your purpose as a quality assurance, I would focus on the first 6 things all the way to attributes. Learn it, figure it out. And as a homework, what I want you to do is create an XML document, similar to what you saw at the books one, right? Create a document that talks about all the trips you have made it in the last 5 years. Okay, so it's your essentially vacation or travel journal, right? And Harshal and I will send you the detail of what all elements you need to make it sure in your travel elements. You can go anywhere you want it, but we need it for every visit. We will tell you what all information you need to provide it in XML document. Okay, so you can say it is what city you went in, which date you went in, who all you went in, and what all things you saw it.
You went Atlanta. You went last week.
Okay, so that's an XML. Any question around XML?
So, say you start on a book, right? Book ID.
Mhm.
There's no end tag on ID and.
What is that? Because ID is an attribute. It's not a tag,
Okay. And location is attribute as well.
right?
Okay.
So this is how you
Okay,
can
that's-
define multiple attributes.
Okay, location and then, okay.
Yeah,
Address can be the attribute as well, right?
right. You need to
Yeah.
decide whether you wanted
Zip
an
code.
attribute or you wanted a tag separate, right? You can do it like a street name.
Yeah.
Either as an attribute or you can put it as that. You need to understand when you want to call something as an attribute versus when do you want to call it a tag. If you're gonna have multiple value of that. So let's say you're going in travel and you have in the city, the places you saw, right? They're gonna be multiple. So it's a bad choice if you're trying to do that as an attribute. It should be a tag because then you can identify as however many places you visit in that city. Right? So if you go to New York, you can say, hey, I went to the World Trade Center, I went to Statue of Liberty, right? I went to Times Square, right? I went to Wall Street. All of those becomes a tags and says place visited. And you put that and it says, there are 10 places that I visited.
Yep.
Okay. Any
Can
questions?
we make it like, places tag and then put place inside this?
You can. You can, right? But that's up to you. That's the beauty of it, right? It's essentially you've been asked to capture some information so that you can share it. How you organize it, it's up to you. As long as it follows the XML rules, you can still do that. Okay. And as we go through it into testing some of the web services, you will see a value of this XML. So between now and Thursday, Harsha and I will put it into email, what is the homework expected for HTML and XML, and then you're expected to do it. Everybody with us? Good?
Yeah.
Now let's take a quick 5-minute break, and then we're gonna switch the gear and we're gonna talk about the databases.
That sounds serious.
I'm gonna do that.
All right,
Just, did you have it installed? Okay. You can just quickly check. I'm like, there.
Yeah, 10 minutes, there. Not 5 minutes, not enough. Today is too much.
just, the break is to stretch the leg.
Okay. It's not enough.
Go to the restroom, drink water, coffee, whatever you want.
So,
See,
I'm kind of like the last.
hold on.
You get me, right?
Maybe you go that way.
You know about this thing? Oh, she learned in a college.
This is my first time.
Not after that, but you know,
Like a college student, which
Yeah, and then,
I just need one.
Another file. Yours still doesn't work, right?
Oh, I already,
I just.
load that, file.
Oh, you already loaded that file?
Yes, just a second. Okay. So the R4 file,
Yeah.
so I will load it. I don't know.
Where did you load it? You can't load it in SQL. Your SQL is not working, right?
Oh, it's working.
It's working now.
Yeah,
What
it was-
was wrong? So you had to change account?
So I uninstall, and install it.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. I try to use a different user.
Okay,
So,
yeah, different user, it looks like it's under different user.
so I went to different user, right? Like,
Yeah, let me see now. Let me see quickly. See if it's-
so it's right database. It's not the database. I think.
Okay, so this is the one.
Yep, you look like-
All right, nice.
Perfect. So only Joyce left and Sneha. Sneha, are you there?
And also, my version is still showing 15, so.
Yeah, it's
I don't
fine.
know.
It will work. I mean, but it's just a permission issue you had it. I think it was running under different user account. Now, we could have gone and make some backend changes. It would have made it work as well.
Okay, well, when I was installing, it shows like 19, where is it, 19?
It's fine, yeah. Well, what you have is okay.
Okay, okay.
What you have is perfectly fine. Yeah, it's fine.